watch comments
You're live now.
and see how bored people are. All right. How is everybody? Which camera am I on? I can never remember that one. Okay. Oh, there. Look at that.
How is everybody?
And I probably want to turn that off, don't I? All right. So, welcome to another episode of Sewing in Story Time. Or do you just want to call it Story Time? I don't know. Anyway, I had a lot of fun last week telling you the story of Black Agnes, and I was like, you know what? The show prep was as much fun as the show, so I decided I was going to tell you another story this week. But we'll get into that in a minute. As promised, last week's episode, we were throwing this together, and so I finished it up, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. I think the outer border has issues. I had a different idea for the outer border, but it's just, I don't know. We'll get it quilted up and see how we feel about it. But that's what we did. That's last week's finished up. I didn't put the fourth line on because I think the last strip was too dark, and it just would have changed the look of it. So that was last week's. Anyway, I just want to do that before I forgot. Shop news. Check the calendar. We have a Learn to Quilt class coming up. I want to say a week from Thursday. Luminaire Owners Club is on the schedule, and so is Intro to Machine Embroidery, which reminds me, I think I have a class tomorrow, which means I better get that figured out. Sign up for those online. The other thing, and keep an eye out, I think we're going to be rerunning the Flower Patch Table Runner, and there's a couple other projects that we'll be getting out on there. Oh, the other big thing, before I forget, a week from today at 8 o'clock in the evening, East Coast, we are going to do a Facebook Live sale. We haven't done one of these for a while. We were talking about how much fun they were. We're doing some spring cleaning. And so we're doing it at 8 so that we can get, if you're on the West Coast, you can still participate. I mean, you'll probably get home from work at that point. But if you remember the early days of us playing with cameras on the internet, we used to do these Facebook Live sales. We're going to put another one together, kind of a spring cleaning. So tune in for that. You can shop in your pajamas from your bed, because Eddie was concerned that 8 o'clock might be too late for some of our target demographic. But when I explained to him that you can be in your pajamas and shop, then it all made sense to him. Right, Eddie? So that's going to be a week from today. Like I said, we're going to do a regular show at noon, but also that evening at 8, we're going to do another live. But it's going to be on Facebook. It's not going to be on YouTube. We go with Facebook because it's kind of a live sale. It's much easier to keep track with the instant messaging on Facebook. We don't have to worry about trolls and people posting in, just because the verification's easier. So that's why we're going to be doing that on Facebook. So if you don't have Facebook, get yourself set up with Facebook, and we'll be doing that next week. Then what else? And then, like I said, check the calendar for classes. And am I forgetting anything? Oh, new fabric. All right. I could have sworn I showed these off last week.
I don't think you did.
You don't think I did? I might not have. But calendars, I guess I didn't. Placemats. The Riley Blake monthly placemats came in, and here is the October, obviously, because, well, you know, boo and pumpkin. So there's the October, and here is the corresponding a coordinate that would be the back for the October. And like many of you asked, no, the March back never came in. This is going to be the back to November, right? Kind of obvious that that's November because of leaves. And then this is going to be, probably should do the top for. So this is going to be the November placemat. And if it's anything like last year, pick these up sooner than later because the November was really popular and sold out. Here's an August one. August or July? August up to. Oh, that would make sense. Yeah, this is August. So lemonade. And then this would be the back to go with that. Nice and purty. And then we have July. This is obviously July because, you know, freedom. America.
Cow.
Ooh, and this is, yes, cows and sheep. So that came in. That's available online. There was something else that came in, wasn't there?
Yeah, there's a quote stuff behind it.
Yes, this right here came in. We got some coordinates to go with it, but the this came in from Maywood Studios. The Fancy Fruit quilt. We have kits. I don't think we've got them online yet. I got to check pricing on them, but this just came in late yesterday, which is why I don't have anything for it. And we have some of the fabric though, right?
I think there's a bed thing.
Yeah.
Right
Well,
there.
there's a panel.
On the table.
Oh, there's this too. Okay. And if you like fruit,
But also
yes.
that thing.
Okay, talking of fruit, there's this classic movie from back in the day. Whenever I think of fruit, whenever I hear fruit, it makes me think of it. There's a great movie called Zorro the Gay Blade. The premise of the movie is that Zorro is sick and his gay cousin takes over. And there's a whole scene in it about the sheriff saying that he's fruity, and it's very funny. I don't know if it's politically correct anymore, but I would encourage you all to go find it. It is a great movie. To this day, I don't know why my dad brought us to the theater to watch it. We were too young to get any of the jokes. My dad thought it was hysterical. We were just excited that we got to watch Zorro. And one of the things, I remember this so clearly, childhood memories. There's a scene, I think he does it more than once. You know how Zorro uses his sword and he like puts Z's on everything? Well, his cousin doesn't use a sword, he uses a whip. And there's a scene where he takes the whip and he puts a Z in a concrete wall with his whip. And we always question, how did he do that with a whip? And after rewatching the movie as an adult, I realized that was probably part of the humor. Completely side note. Oh wait, I think there was a panel in here. Oh, there is a panel. Okay. You can tell that we're super. See, okay. So far, so good. Any questions? Any good comments? And then here is going to be, this goes with that kit that I just showed you. Here's the panel to get an idea of what of course that's upside down, so I'm going to have to go like that. Fruit. It's basically bowls of fruit. Sounds pretty exciting. So that came in. Hopefully we'll have the sample made up next week because Brent is actually working on that right now as we speak. All right. That's all we got for news. And I should have taken longer because that was only 7 minutes in. So if you just wanted to tune in for the news, I guess I did you a favor. We're done early. All right. And yeah, I'll just show this again for anybody that came in late. This was last week's project. Yeah, the border is dark. This is true. It was something I was struggling because what I originally intended for the border on this just did not look right. And that border, kind of, I don't know how I feel about this. But, is what it is. All right. Are we good?
Okay, cool. People like placemats.
I like the placemats. The placemats, I don't think we've got them up on. Do we have them on the website yet? I don't know if they're on the website yet or not. If they're not up on the website, they will be before the day's out. And you can order them online. And if you are interested, you better order them because I know that like some of those are going to sell out quick. All right. And you didn't give me a 1/4 inch foot, Eddie.
You didn't tell me to.
Oh my gosh. How am I supposed to sew without a 1/4 inch foot? That's
Eyeball it?
eyeball it? I mean, I could. What we're doing today, I could get away with eyeballing it. Okay. Entertain them for a second while I get a 1/4 inch foot, Eddie.
I don't do it. Here we go. I got an idea. Here we go.
Well, you know what?
Oh, never mind.
I don't have an ankle adapter. Do you have an ankle adapter?
I don't.
Okay, never mind. We'll just do it without a 1/4 inch foot. You guys are going to see a real mess today. I probably should use a foot. But given what we're going to be doing, I can probably get away without it to start. And then you can all see what it's going to turn into, I suppose, because there'll be some trimming. So it'll be fun. All right. So what we're going to do today is I have this layer cake. Can you go see if you can find me an ankle adapter real quick, Eddie?
What is?
The part that goes here. like a small one. I don't want, because the Luminaire one's going to be a tall, high shank. I need a low shank. If you got to steal it off that, you know where to find it. Anyway, so what we're going to do is, this is the layer cake that came in that went with the fabric that we used last week. And I'm going to just show you a couple different ways to make different blocks with it. I have an idea of what I want to do with it. And we'll see how it turns out. And and while I sew, I will tell you a story. I got lots of notes today. This is a fantastic story. It's a great story. It's a story of intrigue, and I don't know if there's intrigue or not. It's very interesting though. And if you can't tell, I'm stalling till Eddie gets here with the ankle, so that I can get that hooked up, so that I have that all set to go before I really get going. While we wait, one of the first things that I'm going to do with this is I want to actually separate my lights and my darks. Yeah, I've got a foot. I just needed. All right. So, do you want to do that real quick? Can you do it? So, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my layer cake, and I'm actually going to separate out my lights and my darks for this project. It's not really important. There's going to be kind of a scrap component to it, but I am going to want to get the best effect. Separating the lights and the darks is going to give me what I want to do, and it's not an exact science. So if I look at something like this, is this a light or a dark, Eddie?
That's a light, I'd say.
A light? Okay, I would say it's a light. What about this one here? Is this a light or a dark?
I'd say that one's more dark.
That's a dark?
It could be.
But, yeah, I'm just saying. It could be a light or a dark. Well, because if you put it next to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, I'm going to just kind of quickly separate lights and darks. It's not going to be exact, and I'll probably kind of flip it up on the fly as I go on the different colors. But what I want to do is light and dark. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you, there's a couple quick ways to turn layer cake squares into different blocks, and I'll show that to you. And now that I got Eddie here, we can start our history lesson. All right, are we ready to go? Is everybody excited? I've got my fabric separated. I've got my machine here. We decided that we're, of course, put it way over there, and you line it up, and I got to bring it here closer to me so I can sew. And does that even reach the floor? Oh, just barely. Okay. This is my featherweight, because I keep buying featherweights and selling them, and this one I've decided is mine. So this one's not for sale. How's that sound? Is it not plugged in?
No.
That's awesome. All right, now we're a professional operation here. Look at that. So our story today, Eddie. Guess what we're talking about today?
I think.
Okay, what'd you hear?
About Nicaragua.
We're going to talk about Nicaragua. And why is Nicaragua near and dear to you, Eddie?
Because that's where my mother's from.
Your mom's from Nicaragua. So, yes, Eddie's mom is from Nicaragua. And as somebody that was married to somebody from Nicaragua, I have also spent some time in Nicaragua. So the story I'm about to tell you has, I can relate to a lot of the geography, and it's a very interesting story. And it's going way back, because I've met some of the people, not directly from the story. I've actually met the kid that saw how this all went down. It was a dude, really interesting. I met him on a bus and he told me the story. Anyway, we're going to, and the reason I wanted to talk about this, I don't know if any of you, I'm going to start out by reminding you all. So all I've done is I've got a square and I put it right sides together. And then I'm just going to sew all four sides, and I'll show this to you. So there was, I don't know if any of you remember, in the mid-'80s, when there was no cartoons for like a month, because all of the television stations were playing an ongoing hearing I don't even see. When I was a kid, I thought it was like a court trial. Turns out it was just a congressional hearing. Do you know, Eddie, what famous congressional hearing happened in the mid-'80s? When people go sit in front of Congress people and get yelled at by old men in Congress, and they question them, like, what were you thinking? So there was a really famous one, mid-'80s, related to Nicaragua. Do we have any takers on what we're talking about? Mid-'80s congressional hearings, Nicaragua. What would that be? And what's really funny when you stop and think about it, the guy that was probably indicted and guilty of everything that they were talking about, I think he had his own TV show for a while. We're talking about Oliver North and the...
this is the Contra affair.
Yes, the Iran-Contra affair, yes. And I just remember, like, I didn't know anything about politics as a child. All I knew was everybody was talking about Oliver North, and there was no cartoons because of this man, because he was all over the television. So, quick recap. Is the sound coming? Is the mic all right with the sound of the machine? Because that was one of my concerns with the featherweight. That'd be too loud.
I think.
Is anybody complaining? Everybody's all right with the hum of the machine as I narrate this bit of 20th century history. So, if any of you were to sum up, the Iran-Contra scandal was U.S. foreign policy at its best. They were trading, they were selling arms, if I remember right, they're selling arms to Iran to free some hostages. And then, rather than put the money, and so they make all this money off of selling guns to a terrorist organization. And then they take that money, and rather than, putting it back on the books so the accountants can see it, they funnel that money over to the Central American Contras who are fighting the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. So that's where the Sandinistas go. The real scandal, I guess, was the fact that they were selling guns to the Iranians. I don't know. And then, like I said, they took the money and were... So anyway, that's where I first heard about Sandinistas. So, okay, before I do this, I've just sewn all four sides on this. And all I'm going to do now, if you go to overhead, I'm just going to cut an X on this. So that's the first time I ever heard the Sandinistas. And then later on in life, I end up in Nicaragua for other reasons, and run into some Sandinistas. I'm like, oh, those were the guys that made all the cartoons go away when I was a kid. And then I was like, Sandinistas, what's the history? Like, what are the Sandinistas? And do you know why they call them Sandinistas, Eddie?
Because they come from the desert.
I think somewhere that would probably be considered some sort of like bigoted remark. I don't know. It's a good guess. Sandinista, yes. Sandinistas are actually named after Augusto Calderon de Sandino. You know who that is?
No.
He was born over 100 years ago, 1895. So I wouldn't expect you to know who he is. So we've just gone from 1986, Oliver North. We're now going back 100 years to 1895 to the birth of Augusto Calderon de Sandino. Now, when I was researching this, something I found interesting, knowing what I do about Latin American culture, which was interesting to me is that he took that de Sandino. Typically speaking, in a Latin American name, you get two last names. You get a first last name and a second last name. And so, and you take your father's last name. I take that back. Anyway. So anyway, Sandino is the son. We'll get into the details here. Sandino is actually the bastard son of a wealthy landowner who had a piece on the side with one of his peasant campesino wives. So we're talking like Sandino's. Think of Sandino as like the Jon Snow of Nicaragua. If you all saw Game of Thrones, you know Jon Snow. You know nothing, Jon Snow. So Sandino is the son of a peasant farmer and a wealthy landowner. So he grows up till the age of 9, living as a peasant. And then his dad comes along, he's like, you know what, this is my son, I'm going to take him and educate him. So at 9 years old, he gets his fat cat rich dad comes along and decides that he's going to send him to school. So he gets educated. So you can already see, this is already starting out like a good Hollywood story. Again, I don't know why this one isn't made into a story. So you've got this, peasant, dad comes on, takes him out of squalor, decides to educate him. So that happens, and then the next when you look at his biography, they bring up the fact that he was present for the Battle of Coyotepe. Coyotepe, yes. Now, Coyotepe is happens in 1912, which would have made Sandino 17 at the time, and Coyotepe is just outside of Masaya. Sandino was born in Nikinomo. And I know this means nothing to any of you. I can just tell you, I've been to these places. Nikinomo is fantastic. It's almost like it sounds. I mean, what do you imagine Nikinomo is, Eddie?
Like a nice place.
No, it's like this little village. It's like 3 houses and a yeah, with a dirt road. Nikinomo was really cool. So he was born in Nikinomo. Coyotepe is on the main drag coming out of Masai heading to Managua, and it's Coyotepe actually still there today. It is actually now a Boy Scout camp, believe it or not. Coyotepe has a long and interesting history, and it is really creepy to go visit. But it was a fort. It's an old kind of Spanish fort built on a hill. And what happened in 1912 is the United States Marines, went in and took it over. Now, I'm not going to get into all the politics. There's a lot of rabbit holes to go down here. I'm going to go above here. All I'm doing here is, so I cut this in an X, and you see what you get when you cut it in an X, and then you iron it out, is you get 4 pieces that are the same. All I'm going to do now is I'm just going to trim the rabbit ears off this, and we're going to make a block, and I'm going to show that block to you when we're done. So anyway, the Marines are there. Now, things to keep in mind. There's all sorts of stuff going on right now. The idea of a banana republic, you want to have some fun, look up banana republics and see what that's all about. But the big thing going on in Central America right now is the fact that the United States took over from France in 1904 to finish the Panama Canal. One of the and they didn't get finished up till 1914. But one of the things that was happening up until the finishing of the canal was this idea that they were going to put a canal through Nicaragua. Because it's actually a lot less digging if you go from the Gulf of Mexico. You create a canal to the Lake of Managua, the Managua Lake, which, interestingly enough, is the only body of water in the world that has freshwater sharks. So you dig a canal there, and then from there you dig out to the Pacific. So it's actually a shorter route over land to do that. So at this point, as they're digging the Panama Canal, there was some talk about digging a canal through Nicaragua, and like I said, I didn't go completely into the rabbit hole. There's probably a bunch of other reasons why the U.S. was interested in Nicaragua, but at this point, the U.S. is knee deep in the Panama Canal, and there's no way they want to lose that because of how much they're into it, and they know that if there's a canal through Nicaragua, suddenly that investment doesn't play out. Panama Canal is a whole other story. Did you know that Panama is an invented country, Eddie?
How does that work?
Panama is a fascinating story because there was a French investment company that wanted to put the canal in, and so they decided to start, and they're like, to get money, they're like, well, we need to get the rights to the land in the canal, and so the company's like, okay, we'll buy the rights, but the Colombians didn't want to sell it. So this is no joke. Some French dude invents a flag, and then he goes and he tells somebody, you know what, Panama is actually its own country, and he gives the flag to some rebels. The U.S. parks a couple of battleships off the coast and declares Panama an independent country from Colombia. I mean, I think it's a little more convoluted than that, but that's what to understand what's going on in Central and South America at the turn of the century, that's the kind of shenanigans happening. Like, hey, we want to dig a canal here, but nobody's going to sell us the land. Well, let's just take the land. Well, who's going to sell it to us? Well, if we invent the country, they'll give us the land for the canal. Yeah, that's like I said, Panama Canal is a whole other story. I love the history of the area. It's crazy. So anyway, Marines, 1912, Battle Coyotepe, just outside of Masaya. Apparently, according to when you do your research about Sandino, this affected him, 17-year-old man. I don't know how, but he probably had a bad taste of it anyway. So the real pivotal point in Sandino's life, or one of the real pivotal ones. Okay, so now all we're going to do is I'm going to take these 4, and there's a couple different things you can do with this. You can lay it out like that, which I don't know why you would cut it up just to do that. You could start with a square and put corners on it. I am a big fan of pinwheels. I think those come out really neat. So you can go pinwheels. And you see how I got this at just two squares of this? Or you can also do chevron type things. See a chevron.
You should do that.
You think I should do that?
Yeah. I think you've done like a pinwheel a lot.
All right, we'll do chevrons. I kind of have an idea what we're doing, but we're going to do chevrons. All right. Okay. I don't have we bored everybody to death? Are we do we still have viewers? So anyway, so like I said, 1912. So 1921. That's where we left off. 1921. At this point, he is what, 27? If he was born in, I should have wrote this down. He's born in 95. 21, 5 plus 21, 26. 26 or 27. Anyway, dude gets into a fight with a man by the name of Dagoberto Rivas. I like Dagoberto, Eddie. We should have named you Dagoberto. That's a fantastic name. Dagoberto Rivas. He gets into an altercation. Now remember that even though Sandino is the son of a landowner, his mom is a peasant. And, he loves his mom. And apparently, this Dagoberto character was running his mouth about his mom. And Dagoberto didn't die. All accounts said he didn't die because it was attempted murder. Apparently, Sandino did not like what Dagoberto had to say about his mom and almost kills the guy. So that leads him fleeing to Mexico. So far, so good. 26-year-old son of a campesino flees to Mexico. And the timing in this. So, see, this is where it's interesting. So the timing here is, now, what do you all know about our neighbors to the south in Mexico? They had a revolution around that time. Again, you could fall down the rabbit hole on this one. The Mexican Revolution. But it's just kind of finishing up at this point. It's kind of in its last throes. I believe the revolution ended in they say ended in the 1920. So he gets there in 1921. So there's still some of that going on. But so he arrives in Mexico with all of that kind of happening. The Mexican Revolution is just kind of finishing up. And one of the things that's interesting about the Mexican Revolution is that there's a few ideas percolating in the culture as a result of the revolution. Now I can imagine that after the American Revolution, when you stop and think about it, I mean, I'm sure we had our own ideas about imperialism in British society and all that. So, imagine that after the Mexican Revolution, there is some stuff going around, and there's a few things that are very interesting that show up in the Mexican Revolution. And this I actually found. I read and watch a lot of stupid stuff, so a lot of this overlaps with other stuff I've read. But interestingly enough, there's two big things in the 3 big things that come out of the Mexican Revolution that Sandino's there for. Obviously, is the big anti-imperialism thing, which you can still hear about today. There's still people that clamor on about anti-imperialism in the U.S. and all that. That's a whole nother conversation. We won't get into politics here, but. I say that we're talking about probably one of the biggest political. Anyway, so anti-imperialism, which we all understand what that is. The next one that I think as Americans we can't really appreciate is the anti-clerical movement. And I found this rather fascinating because anti-clerical, I mean, because, in the U.S. when we say clerical, the first thing most people think of is a secretary. She does clerical work. And, oh man, I'm in trouble, Eddie. You hear what I just did? I said a secretary, she does clerical work. That was super sexist of me. I'm not saying all secretaries are female, but, cultural norms. Anyway, so when we say clerical in the U.S., a lot of times we think of administrative kind of secretarial work. Clerical, as a root word, gets its name from the clergy. So the anti-clerical movement in Mexico wasn't some movement that was kind of like, we hate secretaries or we hate administrative assistants. They were anti-church. They didn't like the control that the priests had over the culture. And I think, like I said, this was interesting to me. This is a whole nother rabbit hole. But from an American standpoint, we have no idea what they were talking about because when we think of separation of church and state, we really have it, and I think a lot of people that have not experienced what happens outside of the U.S. have a really good appreciation of what that means. Having spent some time in Central America, I totally get separation of church and state. But the anti-clerical movement was when, because you have to remember, do you know why Brazil speaks Portuguese and Venezuela and the other half of South America speak Spanish? Do you know why that is, Eddie?
No, but
No? No idea? And you've ever looked at a map of South America, it's like a line down the middle? You know why that is?
I don't.
Because the Portuguese and the Spanish were like fighting over it because, Columbus discovered America.
I can imagine that.
And I believe, and was Columbus, they say he was Italian, right? Was Columbus Italian? I remember it's a whole mess because Columbus was sailing for Portugal with Spanish money or yeah.
He's Italian.
He's Italian.
He died in Spain.
Yeah, because he was sailing for the Spanish. But anyway, long story short, and this is the internet. So when I get this wrong, you can't hold me to it because it's the internet. Long story short is both Spain and Portugal claimed South America. So back in the day, how do you settle an international land dispute?
You cut it in half?
You go talk to the Pope.
Oh, that would make sense.
So to really understand the anti-clerical movement, the Pope is why, at that point, they went and said, hey, what's the Pope say? The Pope cut it down the middle, says, Portuguese, you get this side, Spanish, you get this side, which is why Brazil speaks Portuguese and Venezuela speaks Spanish, because that's where the line was drawn by the Pope. So when we talk about the anti-clerical movement, you can understand why in Central America, there's the clergy still have a lot of control over things. So that was the anti-clerical movement. Couple that with the anti-imperialism movement, and then there's another thing that was very interesting. Now I'm going to do this one different. I don't want to use that for that because this one's directional, so I'm not going to use this one right now. I'm going to do something different. I like this one. I'm going to do this guy. There was another one. There's another movement afoot in the Mexican Revolution at this point called indigenismo, or indigenism, I think is how you would say it in English. Basically, there was this idea. It's kind of like I don't say local pride. But basically, the indigenous cultures, the native culture, when you say native cultures, the problem with what you run into is because of the mixing of the Spanish and the native blood that you had in Central South America, what they would consider indigenous is actually going to be a mix. The actual natives, like the leftover, I don't say the leftovers, but the remnants of what you have of the Aztecs and the other tribes of the time, those tribes still exist. But when they say indigenous, it's usually that mix of people that was left over from the Spanish influence in South America. So the indigenism movement was this idea that these indigenous peoples and these people of that are native should have self rule, that they should be in charge because it's their land. Not an awful point. And you can imagine to somebody like Sandino, whose mother is one of those indigenous type people, because that's why she was more or less a peasant, because she was not of Spanish noble birth, that really appealed to him. So the indigenism movement was the other thing. So you got three things from the Mexican Revolution: anti-clerical, anti-imperialism, and indigenism. And that kind of helped form this young man, he was 26 at this point. Yeah, a lot of his kind of political, and you can look at some of the politics that he was into at the time. And of course, we get into socialism, communism, and all that stuff, but we're not going to really get there because I think a lot of that, when you start to look what's going on, that was part of those rhetorics were, I think, adopted by these as an alternative to the anti-imperialism stuff. But anyway, I can't remember. Left to right or right to left?
Into out.
Into out. So I start on this side and go that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. See, featherweights are backwards, and So anyway, he's also the other thing that was interesting. This whole time, he actually works his way up, and he's kind of one of the higher ups at Standard Oil. And there's a whole Another rabbit hole to fall down. Standard Oil. That's a great one. Anyway, so that's what we're dealing with there. So this happens in 1921. He sees all this. So 5 years later, he decides to return to Nicaragua, 1926. And he goes back to Nicaragua after being in this whole milieu of political upheaval in Mexico. And believe it or not, at the same time, suddenly, Nicaragua was going through a very similar idea. I believe this was one of their many civil wars. And guess who decides to get involved? So all I did on this one, I guess we can go to the overhead shot. All I did here is instead of sewing all 4 sides, I just sewed 2 sides. And I just realized that if I do this, it's not going to come out like I want it to. Whatever. We'll keep going. So when you sew just 2 sides, instead of cutting it crosswise like this, I am going to cut it crosswise down the middle like that. And since these are 10 inches, we are going to cut them at 5 inches from each side. So anyway, where were we at in our story? He gets back to Nicaragua. They're in the middle of their own civil war. Now, when you look at the civil wars in Central and South America, or Central America, because that's where we're at right now, you have the liberals and the conservatives. And this actually goes back to what we were talking about with the anti-clerical crap that they were talking about. That the conservatives were basically the Catholics. Starting to sound like Northern Ireland at this point. And then the liberals were loosely called the socialists because they adopted a lot of the European socialist type ideas. But like I said, I think a lot of that had to do with their anti-imperialism views. And a lot of their anti-imperialism views, I believe, is a direct result of questionable foreign policy from their neighbor to the north. So that's what, so Sandino gets back to Nicaragua. So you see what happens after we cut those? And you'll get that block there, and you get a 4-patch here. So you get 2 blocks out of that instead of just 1 that you got out of the other one. And I probably should iron that. So we'll iron that since we can. Okay. Do we still have people listening, or are they all bored? Okay, so we've made it back to Nicaragua. 1926, Nicaraguan Civil War. Sandino ends up in the northern part. Sandino bursts back onto the scene. You know how when you study this stuff out, there's just highlights that you see? The next highlight is June 1927. Is when Sandino shows back up in Nicaragua, and guess what? The first thing he does, he gets back to Nicaragua. He's up north. Now, if you ever look at Nicaragua, it's a huge country. Little geography for you if you've ever been there, and if you've not been there, I'll tell you. You've got the west coast of Nicaragua, which is where pretty much all the civilization is at, or along the west coast. Get to the east coast, it's all jungle, not a lot of settlement. And then you get to the northeastern portion of Nicaragua. Nobody really lives there except for a couple. I mean, there's some cities, but it's not as settled as the east coast. But more importantly, that's where the gold mines are at, northeastern Nicaragua. There's some gold mines up there. So in June 1927, Sandino gets 50 guys together. Of course, if you read the literature, you got 50 peasants together. Anyway, he gets 50 guys together, and they go and they take over the San Albino gold mine. All right. Now this is where the reading got really kind of funny. It's interesting. So that's kind of his first thing. He takes over this gold mine. Why do you think he took over the gold mine, Eddie?
Because people like gold. So maybe having a gold mine would be beneficial.
That would have been my thought, but when you read it, it's actually for a totally different reason. He took over the gold mine so he could get the dynamite. Because you need dynamite in mining, and so they wanted the dynamite. That's the story. I'm pretty sure they liked I think the gold had something to do with it too. But they take over the San Albino mine and for the dynamite. And I think the quote is, "We need the dynamite to kill the Yankees." I think that's the quote. Or something to that effect. So they take over this gold mine, and really they wanted it for the dynamite. There was like 500 pounds of dynamite or something. I can't remember. There was actually the number of the dynamite, so apparently this was part of it. So this does two things. First problem, so he takes over the gold mine, and of course, like I said, this is the gold region. So I imagine this has got to be like one of those like oil, like over in like Saudi Arabia where you have all the expats that work in the oil industry. So they have like these communities around it. Because it also says that this is also when he kicks all the foreigners out of northeastern Nicaragua, because he just took this over by military force, and so they decide that they're going to get that they kick all the foreigners out. They're just like, you got to leave. So they all leave, and this is where he kind of declares war on America. Well, I mean, because the gold mine was owned by an American company, and so he kicks all the foreigners out, and the U.S. comes back and gets the Marines involved. And the Marines are already there, by the way, because if you look up, the Marines are already stationed there. I think there's like 100 men, but they were there because of the Banana Republic stuff and the other, like I said, Coyotepe, 1912. The Marines are already there. So Marines get these new orders, go up to northeastern Nicaragua. And is it to protect the Americans that are still up there, Eddie?
No, probably for the gold mine, right?
Yes, their orders are to protect Americans' property. They don't care about the Americans. They want the American property protected, i.e. the gold mines. So this is where you get, now this is kind of interesting, another really fascinating rabbit hole to fall down, is if you look up Marine Corps history, there's a lot of stuff that happened in what they call the Coco River Valley, which that's the area that Sandino's operating out of in northeastern Nicaragua, is the Coco River. A lot of things happen in Coco River. They will say that the first use of close air support and combat by the Marines happened in Coco River. A lot of the jungle, because of the other thing that the Marines did up there, which is fascinating, because like I said, you have to keep in mind that the conservatives are Catholic and the liberals are not. Well, you have the Mosquito tribes that live up there, and because of Catholic missionaries, they had a real problem with the conservatives, but but not with the Americans because they weren't Catholic. That's a whole nother rabbit hole. So what the Marines did up in the Coco River is they started to work with the native Mosquito tribes and learned all about jungles, water tables, operating in the jungle. So a lot of what the Marines knew about that made them successful in the jungles of World War II come out of their operating theater in the Coco River, because one of the generals that was there actually goes on to do a lot of the training for World War II jungle warfare, comes from what they learned from the natives of that area. Just kind of an interesting side note. So Marines go up there, Coco River, and they're fighting. They're just there's just a brawl going on. And if you look at the actual combat reports, Sandino kind of sucked at what he was doing. Like, they would attack like Marine patrols. Marines would lose one or two guys, and then they would take like 80 casualties on Sandino's side. But it was guerrilla warfare. They had some success. Some of the highlights, because this was fascinating to watch, they never caught him. They actually found his hideout at one point, and they with some air reconnaissance, and like, oh, there's people there, and they're like, oh, let's go take it. And they converge on the headquarters, this big military operation, and there's nobody there. It was all scarecrows, straw dummies, just dressed up to look like them. The other thing they did, he faked his own funeral so that they thought he was dead. They would stop looking for him. He did a lot of stuff, but long story short, he was never caught. He operated in the mountains. Harassed the Marines for quite a while, was never caught. They really didn't like him, from my understanding, and I mean, can you blame him? Okay, so here we go. So what I'm planning on doing, I'm just going to show this to people. So these were made of other two blocks. Now you notice you get two out of there, and this one's bigger. What I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to frame this block out, figure out what the difference between the sizes are, frame this out so that we have an alternate block of your of the two here. But you saw how easy this was made. These are both made with just a one layer cake, and you saw how easy it was. I was able to make this and talk at the same time, unlike last week where I sewed the wrong side on. We'll do another one. We got a couple minutes. We'll go another one. So anyway, they're fighting in the mountains for quite a while. This Sandino character never gets caught. In 1932, what happens in the 1930s, Eddie? You had history as a child. What's the 1930s famous for? Oh, come on. Somebody out there, what happened in the 1930s? U.S. history.
Can I get a hint?
It's like the only thing that happened. So Rhonda's right on top of this. What did Rhonda say? The Depression. So what happens in the Depression is suddenly the U.S. realizes they don't have any more money. And they're like, you know what? we don't have the money to be chasing this dude around the forest, around the jungle. So they end up pulling out. One of the things to keep in mind is one of the things that the U.S. actually instituted back in around, like I said, 1912, Battle of Coitepe. They take over, establish themselves. Shortly after that, the U.S. started the Guardia Nacional, which is the National Guard of Nicaragua. So they didn't have a National Guard before then. It was just like a local police. They had the military and the police, but they didn't have a National Guard. National Guard was started by the U.S. So the U.S. decided that in 1930 it's time to leave because they can't afford it. It's depression. Let's get out of there. So they leave. And they leave the National Guard in charge. Now remember, the National Guard was instituted by the Marines as a tool, basically, of the United States. But they're kind of ingrained in the political culture at this point. So needless to say, after the U.S. leaves, Sandino's is not real friendly to the National Guard guys because he's like, you guys are sellouts, basically. I imagine it's similar if you look at current politics. What happened in Afghanistan when we left? Anybody that helped the U.S. would not have been looked upon favorably by the opposition party. And you saw something similar to this when the U.S. left. It wasn't as bad because this was only in the Northwest. Quick story, complete side note, kind of. I remember I was in Nicaragua at one point, and this was after I could start to understand Spanish, and I'm watching a newscast, and there's this dude. I'm talking like this Pancho Villa looking dude with this giant beard and this half afro, and he had like bandoliers, like the old school bandoliers, like Chewbacca, strung across his chest, and he's got an AK-47. This is on the news, mind you. And there's a reporter. What are you guys up to? And the guy's like, and the reporter's like, we're on the ground in Puerto Cabeza, and there's some unrest going on up there. And so this dude, I'm talking straight out of a movie, dude. Reporter asks him, what are you guys doing? Oh, we're hunting gringos. This was 20 years ago in northeastern Nicaragua. That's how, and now that is 80 years after Sandino. Well, yeah, 80 years or 70 years after Sandino died. That's how strong his influence was in that area. That in 1999 or 2000, whenever I saw that, there's a news interview with a dude that is hunting gringos in Puerto Cabeza. That's complete side note. So in that region, a lot of conservative feelings. But there's actually a really good quote though. After the Marines pulled out, Sandino issued a quote, said, "I salute the American people." And with that quote, he also vowed to never attack a working class American who visited Nicaragua, which is why I felt safe going to Puerto Cabeza, even though they were hunting gringos. Never made it there, by the way. We got, again, complete side note. So we're on a road trip. Like I said, East Coast is civilized, West Coast is the Wild West out in Nicaragua. This is 20 years ago, so it may have changed. But like I said, this is about 20 years ago. Yeah, maybe close to 15 at this point. I'm on a road trip, and we are driving just outside of Rio Blanco. I believe it was Rio Blanco. We're trying to find the land route, hit the land route to Bluefields. Anyway, we get stopped at a roadblock. And I'm with Enrique, my brother-in-law. And they decide that because I'm a gringo, I'm working for the CIA. That for no other reason. He's a white boy, he must be CIA. Now keep in mind, we're on 2 days of the worst roads I've ever been on. Like mud season back road in New England, but like this was normal for there. And then we come through this clearing in the trees, the sun comes down, and the most beautiful road I've ever seen. I'm talking, it is paved, it's got the yellow lines, it was the best road I've ever seen. And I looked to Enrique, I'm like, what is this all? Because we're in the middle of nowhere. And he's like, oh, the drug runners pay for this. Basically, the drug runners and the gold mine people got together and said, we need this really nice corridor in the west coast of Nicaragua to move our goods. I'm like, oh, okay. Anyway, it was along that road that we got stopped at a roadblock. And I was detained. We were detained for for almost a day because the guy was waiting for us to give him a bribe. And then when he threatened that he was going to have to, that we were going to have to, that they were going to have to take our car down to, up to Puerto Cabezas, we said, well, you're going to have to pay for the gas because we're almost out of gas. And we realized that we couldn't afford gas money. He realized that the bribe was probably out of the question, and that's when he decided to let us go, which was kind of nice of him because we didn't have any money. We were trying to figure out how to get gas to get home. Complete side note. But anyway, it's the Wild West. It was the Wild West out there 15 years ago. Probably still is. It's a crazy place, fun place to visit. So that's all northwest Nicaragua. And so 1932, National Guards take over. And then in 1934, they start a... there is a negotiations between the rebels and the government, and Sandinista had already played Sandino. And by the way, his middle name is Calderon. A lot of the literature will call him Caesar, Augustus Caesar Sandino. The C is not for Caesar; it's for Calderon. He adopted the name Caesar after he started his exploits. And if you're a fan of history, you might understand that's probably because, Caesar the conquering hero and all that stuff. So the Caesar is actually a self-taken title, which should tell you a lot about the man himself, that he decided that he was Caesar. But anyway, so he says that his guys are going to put their guns down and they're going to go and negotiate at the table. Now, did you ever see Braveheart, Eddie?
No.
Anybody out there ever see Braveheart? What happens in Braveheart at the very beginning? Because they're all going to a settlement because it's about the Scottish Revolution. They're going to go have a peace treaty in Scotland. Do you remember what happened?
On the way.
Yeah, they get there and they're murdered. So what had happened is on their way to the settlement is exactly that. Somoza, the head of, I think it might have been second in command of the National Guard, masterminds this plot to kill Sandino. And that's actually the guy I actually met. I actually met a guy on a bus who I think he said he was 6 or 8 at the time. He was there when they pulled over Sandino's car, and he was there when they shot him. So basically, the National Guard pulls his car over as they're on their way to this peace summit. Pull the car over, take him out, and assassinate everybody. That's how Sandino died, on his way to a peace summit. Now, it gets better. So that's the end of Sandino. But I'm just going to finish the story because it's a fascinating story. And again, like I said, I think my American audience cannot appreciate. I love America. America is great. But when you start to see the foreign policy that we have, you start to understand why some people feel the way they do. So this Somoza character who masterminds the assassination of Sandino, 2 years later, guess what he does, Eddie? Takes over the government. He's the head of the National Guard. He's like, yeah, I'm the head of the National Guard. I declare myself president. I think there was maybe an election that they pretended to, because he got elected 3 or 4 times. He got elected twice or 3 times, and then and then the Constitution says you can't get elected again. So he decides to change the Constitution to get himself elected again. And after he changes the Constitution, announces that he's running again, some dude shot him. So gives you an idea of the kind of character he is. But you have to question, this is the guy that killed Sandino. Sandino, the guy that the Marines couldn't get. Sandino, a pain in the U.S.'s side. They can't get him. And this dude who works for the National Guard, which was trained and pretty much owned by the U.S., masterminds a plot to kill this guy. It's all suspicious. And just to throw another one out there, this is the first time I heard this when I was down there. I was like, what? And it actually turns out to be true because you go down there and there's a lot of people. Because Sandino, Somoza dies in 1953, and then his sons take over. Luis and the other one. There's 2 of them that take over. And people hate the dude. I mean, that's why the Sandinistans took over in the 70s. And that's why the Contras... Because the Sandinistas took over, they're socialists, and that's why Oliver North and his gang were like, hey, let's fund the Contras to take out the Sandinistans because we don't like what they do, because they're the ones that took over from Somoza. Whole side story. But interesting enough, as I remember when I was down there, everybody's like, oh, we hate Somoza. And oh, by the way, did you know that this brutal dictator of Nicaragua, West Point graduate? And I was like, no. Yep. Look it up. Class of 1946. The class of West Point class of 1946. That was that was the same Somoza that was the dictator for many years in Nicaragua. And to quote Teddy Roosevelt about his father, because I wonder if that was like a deal that the original Somoza, the dad, got, the one that got assassinated. His kid is the one that graduated in '46 from West Point. FDR's quote about Somoza. This one really this really sums it up. FDR says, Somoza may be a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch. So you can understand why there was the Sandinistans in the 70s. The Sandinista movement actually takes off, I think, in the 60s, really comes to fruition in the 70s after the earthquake. There's an earthquake in Nicaragua that pretty much demolishes the capital, and that left a kind of a vacuum where the Sandinistas took over. But that's where the Sandinista movement comes from, is from Sandino. Who, oh, by the way, he got money from the USSR for his fight back in the day, but they stopped funding him when he refused to acknowledge that Marxism was a good thing. So, for all the claims that he was socialist, he took their money, didn't take their ideas. What was I so anyway, the same dude that, like I said, that I had met that had talked, that was there when Sandino died, was very much a part of a lot of this. And it was interesting talking to him because he was talking about the whole FSLN movement of Ortega and all that. And they are not, he's like, those guys are a bunch of grifters. They are not what Sandino stood for. And it was very interesting. So the modern Sandinista movement, though based in the struggle of the original Sandino, the whole socialist bent of it is very interesting. Anyway, but that's how we got to 1986 with Oliver North, because the Sandinistans, which took their name from Sandino, overthrew Somoza, the West Point graduate, in the 70s. And so we were taking the money that we made off of the guns we were selling to the Iranians to pay for the revolution that we were trying to foment in Nicaragua in the 80s. Completely failed, by the way. In the 90s, there was eventually a democratic election. I think put Chamorro in charge, and they've been going back and forth ever since. It's very interesting. I think Ortega's back in president. I don't know. I don't follow as closely as I used to. But it's very interesting if you look at the history of Nicaragua. It's a very interesting synopsis. Also, you get a really good look at American foreign policy back in the day, and I can't imagine it's changed much in some areas. But fascinating stuff. But that's the story of Sandino. Freedom fighter. Like I said, again, straight out of a movie. He's often portrayed as like a Robin Hood character in a lot of the literature. But like I said, he's the bastard son of a peasant, and I use bastard in the actual sense of bastard, not in the derogatory mark. That kind of rose to power among all the chaos and made a name for himself as a guerrilla fighter. And it's like I said, that's the story of Sandino, Eddie. That's your heritage. Now, my question for you, Eddie.
Yeah.
Do you think your mom's pro or anti-Sandinistan?
Oh, I don't know.
You don't know?
Sandinistans were like peasants, right?
Yeah, they were fighting for the working class.
I feel like she might be anti-Sandinista.
That's a whole other problem. Okay, we got a couple minutes. Okay. I'm just going to share this story too. Like I said, I spent a lot of time in Nicaragua. I love Nicaragua. I think it's a fantastic country. I would love to go. I'm hope to go back there again sometime. And maybe if I can convince my brother-in-law that we relive our trip that we did back in the early 2000s, would be awesome. Oh, that was fun. But as a side note, one of the fascinating things is I actually more than once spent some time actually in the fields with some of the campesinos, the subsistence farmers. And there was just one dude, Elias is the dude's name. This is grizzled old dude, super cool guy. I was helping him put in papayas, I believe is what we were planting. Grueling work. And so we're out there putting in papayas, and I get back to his house at the end of the day because his wife was nice enough to give me lunch because we helped him out. And we're sitting in there. Now, mind you, he lives in a hut in the middle of nowhere, gravel floors, pretty standard stuff out there. And I look up, I'm eating, and I look out, and I notice something in the back behind his house. And I use the word house very loosely in this. It's a freaking combine. You know, one of those giant grain combines that you see that, you know, the $500,000 piece of equipment that you use to harvest grain. That's sitting behind this guy's house. Just torn apart, looking like it's at a junk, like at a salvage yard. And I'm like, what is that all about? And he's like, yeah, when the Sandinistas took over, so this was 20 years before I saw it. When the Sandinistas took over in the 70s, or in the late 70s, or maybe it was in the 80s anyway. When the Sandinistas took over, there was a corporate farm down the road, and well, you know, they're for the workers, so I'm a farmer. They gave me one of the combines. Said, I don't know what to do with it. We can't drive it. We had no use for it. Said, we've been using it for the last 20 years to sell for spare parts to keep the bus running. It's like, that is one of the, when you start to, nobody talks about, you know, where do some of these policies end or where do these ideas lead to? That right there, that is to me one of the most fascinating things. Like I said, I think Elias was a fantastic guy, but they took, that was just a waste of resources. That combine, what that could have done had it been in the hands of somebody that knew how to use it for the agricultural, you know, betterment of that particular village would have been fascinating. But instead, they had been picking it apart for parts for buses and other heavy vehicles for 20 years. It was crazy to me. It was kind of funny too. I mean, not funny, but it was just it's very interesting. Things that you see along the way. Anyway, I have no idea if any of this makes sense. But I'm rambling at this point, and you've seen the couple blocks that we've made, and I'm hoping, like last week, I'll actually get a quilt done. Hopefully it'll be better than, like I said, I don't really like how that one turned out. I got to revisit those borders, because I think the borders on last week's isn't really doing it for me. Maybe I'll quilt it, maybe that'll save it. But we'll hopefully get this put together, and you guys can see the direction we're going. But this is just this layer cake is available on our website if you want to buy it. And you can do the same thing. So you can see how we're making all these blocks are coming out. So you got the 4-patch, we've got the chevron. I've got an idea what we're going to do. And we'll continue putting them together. But you saw how easy they were to make. Hopefully you all got something, learned a little bit of history. Like I said, I think Sandino's an interesting character, very fascinating. Real interesting local hero. When you're in like Nindari or Nikinomo or Messiah, a lot of local cultures around Sandino. Really interesting guy. But that's a story. He was just a freedom fighter that up in the mountains of Nicaragua. Like I said, very interesting too. The ripples from that. Like I said, the Marine training. It's just very how it's all kind of connected. It's fascinating to me. And I am probably rambling at this point. And I've bored enough of you that there's only 6 of you now watching. Story time with Brent. What are we going to talk about next week? I'm enjoying this format. I don't know if anybody else is. I'm enjoying the format because the show prep is very interesting to me. So yeah, we'll be back next week again with another story. Hopefully, it's interesting enough to keep at least 6 of you entertained. And with this quilt finish, you can see what that looks like. But don't forget also next Wednesday night we're gonna have a Facebook Live sale. So that means make sure you can get on your Facebook account. And check out, sign up for our email newsletter because we'll send out a link for that next Tuesday when it comes closer. I might even send out a reminder this Friday. But that's pretty much all I've got today. Hope you all enjoyed it, had some fun, learned something. So on, and be excellent to each other.